but Mike, are you able to see the waiting room?
I am.
I'm admitting people.
Okay, great. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. Okay.
Of course.
So back to getting started. No, so sorry. Okay. Yes, this is a presentation of the Colorado Native Plant Society's Southwest chapter. We're kind of based here in Durango, Colorado. Myself and Michael Remke, who is also here tonight, are the co-chairs of our chapter. I'd really love to invite you all to join our chapter. I'll walk you through how you can do that here in a moment. If you're a member of the Native Plant Society chapter, you'll get direct emails from us about when we have events like this tonight and field trips throughout the summer. We usually have a really great field trip series throughout the whole summer. We also are on Facebook, so please look for our page, Colorado Native Plant Society Southwest Chapter. Some of the exciting upcoming things that we have going on is that we're going to roll out 2 student scholarships of $500 a piece for students that are currently enrolled in some university or college and are doing work on plants, plant ecology or botany. And we're happy to offer that from our chapter's dues, or the dues that you pay when you join our chapter. We are also recruiting someone to volunteer to be the field trip coordinator for the summer. It's not a very hard job. You just have to get the people leading the field trip to give you their little bio and the write-up of what the trip is going to be, how strenuous it's going to be, and then relay that information to the statewide chapter, and they put it on our statewide calendar and people can register through there. So it's mostly an exercise in emailing people to get their information. So if anyone is willing to do that for us this summer, we'd really appreciate the help. And also, I'd sent out a call to all of our membership a little while ago to ask people to sign up to lead a field trip. And we got lots of response, and everyone wants to lead a trip in July. So it would be nice to have some trips in other months besides July. That is peak wildflower season up high. Sometimes it's wildfire season too. But we'd love to have anyone that wants to get out maybe into some lower elevations and help lead a field trip in May or June, or even in August or September and catch the end of summer. So please be in touch with us if you're interested in any of those opportunities, but particularly if you're interested in coordinating our field trips for us. So I want to just demonstrate quickly. If you would go to the Colorado Native Plant Society website, which is conips.org. There, first you would click the button at the top of the banner that says Join Donate, and that would bring you to this screen where you can choose what chapter that you want to be a part of, and we are the Southwest chapter. So click there. I believe it's still $25 for an annual membership. And so I just encourage you, if you're a plant enthusiast and you haven't joined, we'd love to have you as part of our chapter. So with that, I'm going to stop talking about how great it is to be in the Native Plant Society, and I'll invite Dr. Michael Remke to introduce our speakers.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you all for joining. It's great to see so many people show up on a Tuesday evening to join us for this lecture. I don't want to spend too long on introductions, but it is my pleasure to have Peter Brown and Tom Martin join us. Peter is an individual that I know from the world of dendrochronology and studying tree rings, and someone who I've gotten to work with through my job at Mountain Studies Institute and his role at the Rocky Mountain Tree Ring Research Laboratory, which he founded. And Tom is an individual that I, for a long time, have paid attention to, as his knowledge of Grand Canyon history is absolutely phenomenal. And when I saw these two start posting content on social media about this adventure down the Grand Canyon that utilized native plants, I was just absolutely blown away. Like, this has to be a Native Plant Society talk. And it's a little bit different from some of our conventional presentations in that it's much more of adventure botany and the things that we can use native plants for. And it looks as if Peter is joining us from Nankoweap Granaries, and Tom is joining us from the Dory House, where he has many of his boats behind him. So without further ado, I am happy to hand it over to these two wonderful gentlemen to hear about this great native plant adventure.
Pete, you're on.
Yeah, I was going to say, thank you, Michael, first of all, for the invitation to speak to the group and everything. And yeah, let me. So we've got a slideshow. Tom's going to kind of take off on the first part. So I think I can share here. So yeah, Tom, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, Amanda and Mike, thank you so much for having us tonight. This presentation before Powell, a descent of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon on a tule reed boat. Yeah, this is native vegetation that was the watercraft of choice for over 10,000 years in the Colorado River. And so this is an explanation of how we stumbled into it and what we did with it. And here we are. Go ahead and run the next slide, please. People remember, of course, John Wesley Powell, the 1869 expedition through Grand Canyon. By that time, two people had already claimed they had gone through the Grand Canyon on log rafts. And I experimented with that one time, and it was terrifying. It was really, really terrifying. Go ahead, Pete. There were a bunch of river runners on the river, well documented in a bunch of really wonderful, keep just rolling them through, Pete. No, don't go backwards, keep going forwards. In a bunch of really crazy watercraft. And the history of boating, of course, is very well documented from the days of Powell forward. Keep going, Pete. I love this photo. It's the first picture oldest picture I've been able to find of women in boats, but we know they were there. We know they were doing things as well, not just the guys. Go ahead. Rubber boats showed up in Grand Canyon in 1938. And those of you that have been through Grand Canyon, the majority of the boats that are going through Grand Canyon today are built of this stuff because it bounces off of rocks and is a lot easier to patch than anything else. Go ahead. But the more I looked into this history, the more I discovered that there were mariners on the Colorado River long before John Wesley Powell, well documented in the lower end of the basin. And just amazing watercraft. Pete, I think you've got a couple more photos of these guys.
Yeah.
And this is in California, and from the California coast down to Peru, indigenous peoples of the Americas were doing these amazing things. This is a wonderful picture because that's tule reed in the background, also common name bulrush. And this is a wonderful boat. You can see this. These folks here, they're not even getting their feet wet. And we all talk about stand-up paddleboards. Well, guess what? Stand-up paddleboards have been around for thousands of years, and they work really, really well to capture wildlife on. Go ahead, Pete. They are wonderful craft, expertly built. Again, indigenous people make crafts of art. And you'll see that we made a whisk broom, nowhere near as wonderful as what the indigenous peoples still make today. Thanks, Pete. So this is what started it all off. This is a letter to Otis Marston from a Grand Canyon hiker, math professor named Harvey Butcher. And Harvey was sent on a mission by Marston to talk to this old guy back in 1958, who was in Grand Canyon in the 1800s and started telling Harvey stories, including a story about a very special ruin that he had been told about. And it was supposed to contain a boat made of some kind of rushes. I couldn't believe it when I saw that. Next picture, Pete.
Oh, Tom,
It's a surprise.
yeah,
So the,
so I threw this one in just because, okay, then the next step in the evolution of this story is that Tom Martin wins, so you put in, there's a lottery every year for permits for the next year, for private DIY trips. And Tom won a permit for this past December, launching December 30th. And I just thought this picture kind of captures the joy of a wintertime Grand Canyon trip where you're cleaning the dishes in your down thick wool coat. You're still cleaning dishes and cooking and stuff, but look at the background. You're in the Grand Canyon. It's just, it's the best. So anyway, this was supposed to be Tom winning the permit for this year.
well done, Pete. So knowing nothing about tule, I figured I better go harvest some and try to, dry it out and build a little raft because I had a permit. And this stuff is beautiful, smells good. Crawling around in the mud, it's 10 feet over my head in the sky. Just brilliant stuff. Hey, Pete, can you talk a little bit about what you found out about what makes tule buoyant?
Yeah, and so I hate to say it, but this is probably about the only native plant data that we've got in the whole talk. But it's, Skenoplectus. There's a number of different species. It grows throughout the Colorado River Basin, lower basin, upper basin. It's pretty, crazily widespread, particularly the genus. A lot of it, I think the Skenoplectus is a fairly recent designation for what used to be Scirpus, the genus Scirpus. I'm not clear on all of that. But as Tom said, the big thing is that as with a lot of wetland plants, these are characterized by these parenchyma, specialized parenchymal cells that are actually air-filled. And for wetland plants, there's specialization for growing in hypoxic soils that you can get oxygen down to root systems for respiration and so on. And also methane can leaves out of these things. So anyway, bottom line is they're buoyant. There's lots of air pockets in these things.
So my hard-suffering wife and I hopped in the pickup truck and drove to Blythe, Arizona, where the Bureau of Land Management has some land along the Colorado River, and they gave us a prescription about when we could harvest the tule when rare and endangered migratory waterfowl were not nesting in the tule. And so we crawled on in there and started harvesting the stuff. Go ahead, Pete. Tied it up on top of the pickup truck and drove it back to Flagstaff and then laid it out in the back porch. We're at 7,000 feet in Flagstaff. Tule actually grows out at our solid waste plant where the effluent, the cleaned up water from our sewage goes off into this little side canyon. Tule grows there. So it grows all across the drainage. Once it dries out, go ahead, Pete. Stacy Davenport, a good friend of ours, came up from Prescott, and we had a little boat making party. We bundled the stuff up and made 3 bundles of it. We realized when we made the first attempt, we didn't think we had enough. So we drove back to Blythe, harvested some more, dried it out, and then wrapped it on the outside of the bundles we'd already made. Go ahead. And here's our little boat. We didn't know what to call it, but we knew it had lots of knots. And we knew this was kind of a nutty thing, so we called it Lots of Nuts, or Lots of Knots. And you can go from there, but it's like I say, it's a whisk broom compared to what the indigenous peoples today make. And unfortunately, I don't know any Mojave or Cocopah. Otherwise, I'd have run down there and got them in on the project. And we didn't have a lot of time between idea of inception, getting the river trip and needing to get on the river. So with a boat in hand, I have a boat. The boats in the background here are a Grand Canyon National Park's museum collection. These are all historic boats in my screen background here. I have a replica of one of these boats, and I was going to drive that. And there's no way I was going to take this little tule raft and I was going to paddle that, because after a day or two, it was going to sink, right? So I asked my wonderful friend, Pete Brown, who I've known since high school, if he wanted to do this. And Pete was so enthusiastic. That's what I needed to make sure that this would at least get a couple days down the river, was Pete's enthusiasm alone was going to do it. So Pete, take it away. Then what happened?
Well, so first of all, I just wanted to threw this picture in just to show Tom's beautiful boats. So those are the two boats that Tom's built now, Grand Canyon river running boats. The Gem is a replica dory from the 1953. And just by the way, I want to throw out this, Tom's got this excellent book called Big Water, Little Boats, about the story of this and some of the early boats as well. And also I wanted to point out that Tom has this wonderful Vimeo channel where he and Greg Hales, who's a videographer expert, have put together a really great series of videos on a lot of these early boats. So if you're interested in any of that, be sure to look that stuff up. So, but anyway, we got to Lee's Ferry, coming back to our Tule boat, lots of knots. We got to Lee's Ferry, you know, there's all this rigging and stuff going on. One thing I thought of for the boat too was we went ahead and we, another little modification we did was we did pound 3 hardwood dowels just bought from, Home Depot through the 3 bundles. Right now they're just tied together. So this would give a little bit of rigidity, plus add some points, some places to tie some equipment onto. I at first thought that thigh straps, so like inflatable kayaks, quite often we use thigh straps so you can balance with these thigh straps. So I tied the thigh straps onto these two, plus then we tied a seat onto this thing. Show you here in a second. So there's the seat, and then you can also see the thigh straps. This is actually at first launch right there at Lee's Ferry. Up to this point, we didn't even have an idea that the thing would float. So it floated, it moved around pretty well. There's also the next step that we had on this whole excursion was that there's a ranger, Park Service ranger, of course, who checks everybody in, who, there's a whole orientation session to go through before you go down the river. And then also she checks all the equipment that you're taking down the river, life jackets, first aid kits, and so on. Well, she was pretty skeptical of this experiment that we had planned until I actually got out there on that first afternoon and rode it around just right there off of the launch ramp at Lee's Ferry. And so the next morning, Peggy said, sure, take it, see what it's going to do. And I'm pretty sure she was like the rest of us, thinking that, yeah, probably about mile 20, mile 30, we're going to be putting it on the back of the boat, one of the rafts, and that's it. So anyway, it floated, it moved well. You can kind of see the wake behind me there on the. Another thing I wanted to mention is Tom had recruited a safety kayaker specifically for our Tule experiment, Fiona Gormley, this 21-year-old who came along on the trip and in her kayak. So it was great having her there in case, for safety purposes. Another modification, just in terms of, so at this point now, this is about day 2 or 3, and one of the problems, at first I just had the seat sitting on that middle bundle, and we realized that was really depressing that center bundle quite a bit. So we found this piece of driftwood and strapped that on. So that was our last modification for the raft. And then the final thing, just in terms of logistics for this, I'm throwing this out in case anybody ever wants to try their own Tule raft trip down the river anytime. but we hauled it out of the water every night. This was, and stood it on end so that it would actually drain. And it would quite often, particularly later in the trip, it would take 4 of us to haul the thing out of the water. Usually by in the morning, then I could drag it back to the river by myself. So it would tend to drain and dry out quite a bit. And of course, we'd have layover days occasionally where it'd be able to stand in the sun all day long. So this idea actually came from the Peruvian, what do they call them, the caballeros. They ride these tule rafts out in the surf, and then every evening they bring them back and stand them up. Otherwise, I mean, it was just an incredibly pleasant trip down through the canyon. I mean, of course it is, but it was a great way to go. Very intimate, right there next to the water. I could bring the boat out of the water, and the next morning I'd have to go up and smell it because it still smelled so good. That tule, Tom mentioned that. Tule smelled really good. It was able to keep up. I could move it through the water, had no problems at all. The flotation was wonderful. Could keep up with the boats all the time. Anywhere they went, I could go. This was a stop we did at Phantom Ranch, and we, of course, Tom went up and found a ranger to come down, and he got a photo of it. And of course, the main thing we wanted to make sure that he was able to tell Peggy Kolar, the ranger, the Lee's Ferry ranger, ramp ranger, that we made it that far at least. And by the way, we didn't think it was going to make it all that far. I'm going to talk about that just in a minute or two, but it just kept going. I mean, it was wonderful. Again, hauling it out every night, even up on some of the steep banks. That was a big chore. A few times was just getting it up the banks. Just to show you, I mean, the tule would get saturated. It really would. There would be quite a bit of water that would drain out of it. I always thought we should just put a pan underneath it or something, but then we'd have to raise it up somehow or another to actually keep it dry. But it lasted a long time. Lasted the whole trip. Anyway, I just the next question probably everybody's going to have is how do you do in the rapids? And so just to let you know, I mean, I fell off in the Priya Riffle about a half a mile, quarter mile downstream from the launch point at Lee's Ferry. The Priya Riffle isn't even considered to be a real rapid. So I wasn't thinking it was going to be possible to do, the whole river. I didn't think so, but this is actually the first big rapid. And you can see the thigh straps. I've given up on the thigh straps at this point. They just did not work. And so what I found, and this is exactly the way the Peruvian folks do it, is they just drop their legs on either side of the raft. But this was in House Rock Rapid, which is the first really big rapid. And that wave right there, I thought it took the helmet off of my head. And if it survived that rapid, that wave, that's me checking to make sure that the helmet is still on my head. And if it survived that rapid and that wave, and I did too, I knew at that point it was going to make the whole trip. And I kept trying to convince Tom it was going to do it, and I think he was still he wasn't sure it was. But one of another big rapids where, and this is just completely my messing up, was Hance Rapid. Anybody who's been down the river, Hance is the first, really big one, and a fairly tricky rapid. There's a lot of rocks and a lot of pour overs, and you're supposed to go way to the left of where I am. The caption on this one, somebody suggested, should be there's, you can see Fiona over there, the safety kayaker, and her caption right now is, "You're on your own, kid." So, because I'm way off, I just messed this up completely. So here's you can see one of the rafts, big rafts, 18-foot rafts, and then I'm way to the right of where I should be in this one. So I know Tom was like, what the heck is he doing? I fell off the raft on this one too. Just a few more of rapids. These are all Tom's photos, but Hazel riding her boat through Upset Rapid, and there's a big hole in Upset. Well, I was able to miss the hole by making a right-hand cheek, but so there's the hole behind me. Otherwise, though, I have one more rapid. This is actually lava, which is, one of the biggest and scariest. While we were scouting lava, there was actually this group of kayakers that came through. I think there were 9 or 10 of them. And so we got to watch them run lava. They didn't even scout it. They just went ahead and ran it. But just to show you, this right in front, just right in front of the red boat there, is the ledge hole that's nobody wants to go into. It's a big recirculating wave, and it flips an 18-foot boat if you get caught in there. So you need to go either right or left of that. So the left-hand run is kind of the safer run for rafts sometimes. Most everybody takes the right-hand run, which is the fun run. And so, of course, I tried the right-hand run. But just to show you what the right-hand run can look like, and then here's just my run of that. It's just such a, it's always a little bit, hair-raising when you're on a 18-foot raft going through here. And anyway, it was a blast, I have to say. It was a real hoot. And then I don't make it. And then I still have a couple of other big waves to go through after that. And unfortunately, my camera got a little bit bent over, but the one thing too, I just wanted to point out was it was fairly easy to, if the raft got flipped, to flip it back over. First of all, that seat really helped. And then the second thing was it was pretty easy to climb back on. I only lost the raft one time in an eddy, and Tom was there to help save me, but I just waited until the boat came back around and then jumped on it when it came back around in the rapid. That was just a pretty picture of Bass Camp. First of all, just if anyone ever has a chance to go on a river trip down the Grand Canyon, take whatever time you need to off, just do it, go. It's incredible. So just some final thoughts here. Oh, and then we did have a little bit of weather. It is a winter trip. That's the next question people are probably been wondering about is, yeah, it was fairly cold. It was, the other thing, of course, is night comes early, dark comes early. And so some days we didn't see sunlight all day long, but, and lunch stops. That's one nice thing going with Tom, because Tom knows where all the best spots are that are going to be in the sun right at noon. So we have to go just a little bit further down the river to get to that one at 1 o'clock or 1:30 or something like that. But anyway, this was, we had some rain, we had some snow. But the other advantage is we got every camp we wanted. I think we saw 6 other trips while we were down there. It's just quiet, it's peaceful. You got the canyon, the entire Grand Canyon to yourself. This is the last little stretch. Columbine Falls is just right behind me. From this point, it's about 2 more miles, a mile or so to the Grand Wash Cliffs, 278 river miles from Lee's Ferry. This is what the raft looked like at the end of the trip. So after 30 days, 278 miles, countless number of rapids, rocks, sun, so on. And that's what that raft looked like at the end of that. Just to remind you, that's at the end of the trip. This was at the beginning of the trip. It was as structurally sound, as buoyant, and as easy to move through the water on that last day as it was on the first day. So in terms of implications, I mean, we're just kind of throwing this out. Both the Navajo and the Hopi, Tom talking about, before Powell, both the Navajo and the Hopi have legends of running the river. Shoot, the Hopi, this is the Hopi legend of Tio. So up in the right-hand panel there is his log raft. This was supposedly a young man who lived in a village near the river and got curious one day as to where the river went. Tio is actually the founder of the Snake Clan at Hopi, in the Hopi villages. But also just there's legends, coming out of the Sipapu, Spider Woman gave instructions to the people coming from the third world into our fourth world here through the Sipapu and the Grand Canyon to build reed rafts, reed boats, to navigate the waters at the time coming out of the fourth world. So there's all of these, hints that, could, I think, and as Tom said, I mean, we haven't involved any of the Native folks at all, but I need to talk to some of my Hopi friends about, whether we could kind of put this out a little bit more as, certainly the technology was there, it was possible, the technology could have been traded, not just even for downriver travel, but just even crossing rivers. I mean, the Nankoweap legend, the Nankoweap story and so on. One thing that I've wondered about is, rock art possibilities. This is actually over east of Cedar City, west of Cedar City, the Parawan rock panels. First of all, if it's a boat, it's kind of crooked, but all those people on a boat there, I don't know. I'm just putting this out as, that potentially, the boat technology may not have been appreciated enough. And potentially we could, I think there's more that could be done along that line. So, and then finally, just last couple of slides here is just to thank the crew. Obviously, this was a group effort. We had 16 people both on the top half and 16 people to lava. This was our lava up above lava. And then 2 of our folks had to leave to go back to school. And then 15 of us on the trip down, so from lava. So just to thank everybody for that. Tom would have a safety meeting every morning, and the big thing was, watch out for me if I fell off the raft. And then after a while it got to be, no, watch out for the raft. We didn't want to lose the raft. If the raft went downstream without us, then the experiments ended. But so I really thank everybody for such a fantastic trip and being such a fantastic group. So that's it. Thank you.
Well done, Pete.
Questions? I didn't even see if there's chat.
And we have plenty of time for questions. So if folks want to put their questions in the chat and or raise your hand and we can have you unmute yourself, we would happily have a wonderful discussion about this fascinating trip. See,
I just can't believe it.
I can't believe it either. Crazy.
Yeah, well, neither could we.
I have a
I mean,
question.
this is, Pete, on day 2 or 3, Pete came over and we were doing little oral histories, little 10-minute oral histories. We did 14 of them throughout the river trip. And Pete would start off saying, "It's going to make it, Tom." And I would say, "No, it's not, Pete. Not going to make it. Doesn't have a chance." And by Phantom Ranch, it was like getting this little light bulb went off as I was standing there on the beach, looking at the Bright Angel Pueblo, 1,000-year-old indigenous Pueblo right there. And I wondered, as a river runner, we scurry up to Phantom Ranch to get our lemonade. And I wondered, what kind of lemonade did they have at the Bright Angel Pueblo? 1,000 years ago to give the boaters that were going through some lemonade. This is really something we need to give a lot more credit to the indigenous peoples of the Colorado River. These boats would be repurposed in the fall for other things. They would be made in the spring and used in the summer. Very hard to find in the archaeological record. There is no reason why the indigenous peoples couldn't have run the San Juan and the Dolores and the Colorado and the Green and everything else.
Suzanne had a question up there.
Yeah. First of all, hi, Tom.
Hey, Suzanne, how are you?
Graduated a couple years after me, right?
Yes.
Nice. I'm retired. You're retired. Awesome.
I'm
And
not retired.
if this was addressed already, I'm sorry, but any indigenous people coming down in boats like that would have been in much, much warmer water, right?
Correct. In the summertime. In the winter, it would have been near freezing. It would have been very much colder, but in the fall and in the summer, it'd have been 70 degrees.
So, because pre-dam, it was warmer. So how would that, it would affect the comfort factor of the boatman for sure, but how would it affect maybe the boat itself?
That's a good question. We don't know, except that the indigenous peoples at the mouth of the Colorado River, they had their boats last all summer and clearly in much hotter temperatures than in the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, I should have pointed that out in terms of, because I did fall in the water quite often. Not quite often, but, and I have to say, I did run several of the big rapids fairly cleanly and didn't fall off the boat. But yeah, I had the benefit of a dry suit, a nice warm dry suit, and a, PFD and so on. But yeah, the point I think would be is that is prehistorically that the river is not the river we see today. So it would have been warmer, muddier, so on, and for most of the year. Yeah, as Tom says, it's going to be cold in the wintertime as well. But so maybe nobody did any river running in the winter at all.
There are just a couple of questions in the chat I want to make sure we get to, and a couple folks have their hands up too. Jonathan Romero asked if Harvey ever found that boat that was supposed to be in the ruin in the 1950s.
So just to be clear, that boat in the ruin was seen in the late 1800s. And the guy who heard about that raft in the 1800s was telling that story to Harvey in the 1950s. No, as far as I know, no one's ever found it. And of course, I didn't even know it existed until that letter. And so that's all we've got that actually puts any type of watercraft in the Grand Canyon that long ago.
It's fascinating. It's a mysterious piece of lost history.
Yeah, no kidding.
Brad Snow was also curious what the cord you used for tying the reeds together in the construction of the raft was.
It was actually a bundle of carpet cord that my mom had for years. It was nylon carpet cord, but it was pretty fine cord, but it held together. I don't think we broke a single one of those wraps that Tom and Hazel and Stacy did. So.
And then Mike Purcell has had his hand up for a minute. So Mike, do you want to unmute yourself to ask your question?
This probably is a silly question, but you ever talk to the river ranger that put you guys in?
We haven't seen we haven't seen Peggy since, but the Phantom Ranch ranger took a picture of the little boat and put it in the all park wide bulletin a few days after we went past Phantom Ranch, and so Peggy would have seen that. So and then we notified the Park Service when we exited the park that the boat had made it.
That's super cool.
Yeah, I see that one question. Did anyone else paddle the Tule? No, I'm still kicking myself that I never, we didn't get Tom on the boat, at least in some place where he could have paddled around or something. I also thought we could have, had him, we could have hauled the boat up, where we camped sometime, hauled it up above one of the rapids and let him run it too. So next trip, I guess I'll paddle the Jim, Tom, and you can take the Tule or something.
It's a deal. Yeah, no, as a historian, I know it's a whole lot cleaner if one person runs the boat through the canyon. If 2 or 3 or 4, or what section did you run? Oh, you didn't run the whole thing then? I'm like, no. Pete's the guy, and he did it.
It's such a great delight to see somebody like Pete take on this journey, because I can imagine his enthusiasm. Jenny, I also see that you've had your hand up, so if you'd like to ask your question.
Sure, thanks. Incredible story. Hi, Tom.
Hey, how are you, Jenny?
Good. This time next month, and Peter made me feel good when he said everybody needs to do it. I'll be in a dory down the Grand Canyon. My first trip down there. I wanted to ask, what's happened? Where is the boat now? I mean, this is pretty historic, this boat. What are the plans for it?
So I called a friend of mine, Martin Stamat, who is the executive director of the Glen Canyon Conservancy, and they run the John Wesley Powell Museum at Page, Arizona. And after about 2 minutes on the phone, he said, "I'll be over with the truck, like, in an hour or 2. I'll just be right there." And so that's where it's gone.
Yeah, it needs to be historic.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I did want to answer a wonderful question that Rose Chilcote has asked. She notes here that J.W. Powell documented the use of bull boats at the old Spanish trail crossing north of what is now Green River, and they assumed the bull boats were used to cross the river. Does this follow your understanding of the use of bull boats versus Thule boats? No, it does not follow my understanding of bull boats, and I'll tell you why. Again, looking through the documentation, and this is scary because it ends someplace rather uncomfortable. In the 50s, a river runner noticed a used bull boat in what is today Dinosaur National Monument in the gates of Lador, in Lador Canyon. And by the time he notified the Park Service, and the Park Service took them a while to get interested, by the time they got in there, that bull boat was gone. And they clearly were not in, that bull boat was not in a location where it would have been used to cross the river. So why this is uncomfortable is because Rose should be saying, "Okay, smarty pants, why don't you build a bull boat and go take it through Dinosaur, take it through Lador?" And I'll say, "Well, I'm not that good of a boater. I'll have to get Pete to do it." But no, bull boats are a skin on a frame, on a willow frame, animal hide. And again, I think the indigenous peoples of the Colorado River were very good at that type of watercraft. So it's not just a mention of bull boats there, but it was an actual bull boat in the 1950s in Lador Canyon. It's really, really wonderful.
Bill Coons, did you ask Lori Webster if she's seen anything that might look like part of it? Who's Lori Webster? Bill?
And Constance has a really great point, saying we might want to talk to members of the California Tongva tribe, who fairly recently made Thule boats. The indigenous peoples of the Americas are still making Thule watercraft today. Lake Titicaca in Peru is where you'll see most of them, but again, on the Peruvian coast, the caballitos, the little horses. And also I should mention that the Coronado expedition of 1540 documented Rio de las Balsas, the river of little boats. And they were stunned at the Mojave and the Cocopah, and the Mojave documented incredible swimmers and with their little boats that they could paddle around would actually help the Europeans trying to get to California, trying to get to the west, cross the Colorado River. So again, you start putting these pieces together and it's pretty fun.
Yeah, that's the thing is, I mean, I think, you know, in terms of my, one of the things that I would just love to see is a little bit more emphasis. You know, I just don't think there's been a recognition of a lot of the Southwestern tribes as, you know, there's not that many rivers. So river technology, river travel is not a big feature in much of the, you know, cultural background, cultural history. So is it something though that you know, yeah, it wasn't a major component, but certainly a minor component, an important component, because again, you know, getting across the river, you know, yeah, Colorado, San Juan, a lot of times you could probably, sometimes in the year you could wade across the river. I've waded across the Colorado River at Moab before, you know, had to swim like half a dozen feet or something like that. But other times of the year, you know, it's going to be a major barrier to travel. So, so boating technology is going to be an important component. And I think, you know, it would behoove someone to really work with, you know, to work with tribal folks, elders, so on, and you know, legends, and really delve into this a little bit more.
Pete, I did want to mention that Lynn Floyd wanted to know what the flow was. And our river flow, I believe, was between 8 and 14,000. Pretty nice flow. Like the typical pre-dam hydrograph for that time of year was around 5,000 cubic feet a second. So we had twice the normal water for winter, but we had the normal water for spring and fall pre-dam. And so I thought that was kind of helpful. Someone on another presentation said, yeah, but the river wasn't anywhere near as turbid as it would have been pre-dam. And on the contrary, pre-dam, especially when you weren't in the monsoon season, the summer cyclone season, or the winter snow season, the river would get fairly clear, and the turbidity would drop quite a bit. So again, you know, just trying to put all the things together to figure out what would it be like pre-dam, what would the impediments to navigation in this type of watercraft be.
I see Jan Gorski asking about native plants. Yeah, like I say, I apologize. Kind of the only native plant connection we've got with is our tule. But you know, one that I actually had one, Tom. I think we've talked about this, but is could Phragmites. I mean, Phragmites being a segmented grass rather than a sedge. I wondered if that one, you know, because there's a ton of Phragmites all over the canyon as well. Could that one have been another potential material for a boat? But
it's a good question, Pete. I did a little research before this, of course, looking through YouTube and talking to a bunch of my historian friends, and one of them said they actually did make a little raft out of Phragmites. Again, it is a segmented reed, and it floated for a while, but he was fairly sure that it wouldn't last more than a couple days.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, well, let's do the tule thing. So Michael Remke has asked a really good question. How abundant are tule reed in the Grand Canyon region along the Colorado? Do you think the altered hydrology from dams have changed the abundance of tule? That's a really good question. I do not know the answer to, except that tule has been identified as a native species in Grand Canyon National Park and throughout the entire Colorado River Basin. So you know, my running assumption is that Glen Canyon would have been a pretty good place to find tule. I could be wrong. The Uinta Basin could have been a good place to find tule. Today, with the dam-controlled river, things are, biological community has changed a bit. So
Just on that, I did find a survey somebody did in the canyon for riparian vegetation and springs, plants, and stuff like that. And tule was noted in quite a number of the side canyons along the main reaches. There just never was kind of those slack water areas, probably even historically, because even then it would have been much greater, flood cycle and so on to kind of wipe those out. But where you had more quiet water, I think those tule stands could have gotten established. And like Tom says, probably, in the upper, more the middle reaches where the Uinta Basin, I bet there was probably a ton of it up in there. And Brett maybe still is, I don't know.
And Lisa Borey has a really nice question about, did the indigenous peoples use poles or paddles or both? And from our research, they actually used both, depending on where they were fishing, what they were doing. The Seri tribe down in Sonora on the Sea of Cortez, they were using long paddles with stand-up paddle boards in the surf. Again, really amazing. So I think these indigenous peoples of the Colorado River were very good mariners, and they might have had a couple different types of paddles for a couple different types of things, depending on what they wanted to do.
So,
Hey, Steve Kirst, I'd like to talk to you. Steve writes, having done the Glen Canyon in 1963, do you have any photographs?
yeah.
I can attest to tule growing there then.
That would be, yeah, we need more of that.
That's amazing. Did you get a photograph?
Well, and I your question on the natural materials, and one thing Tom mentioned is you see a lot of these. Well, there's even a couple of tribal colleges in California that have tule building classes, tule boat building classes, and they use all natural material, to tie the tule together. But one of the things that I did notice is, that their wraps are maybe, a foot or 2 feet apart type of thing, that they only have 5 or 6 wraps on a bundle. And as Tom mentioned at one point, is this boat was tule, it was Grand Canyon bound. So, we thought it needed a little more material. But yeah, it'd be very interesting to actually, and as Tom said, I mean, we built this and they built this, just quickly, harvest in November and launch in December. So, but it'd be great to maybe get more of a traditionally built boat and give that a try as well.
To that end, Ann Malidi has a really nice question here. Any plans to build a boat using all natural materials, including the rope used to tie the tule together? Modern tests have shown rope made from plant materials has a breaking strength between 200 and 300 pounds. Not sure if the rope was tested for strength when wet. Absolutely, and a friend of ours made some yucca fiber rope, and we wrapped it around a beam at the house, and I just hung from it. I only weigh 190 pounds now. Yes, again, we need to credit the indigenous peoples with being experts at making rope, and they use that rope for many things, including climbing cliffs, where they wanted to do trans-canyon journeys in places like the Grand Canyon. So again, I see this as I think there's room for a traditional boat to get through Grand Canyon, and and do it in style.
What, more style than we did? What?
Absolutely, way more style than we did. Oh yeah. And again, I didn't expect to be given this talk. You got to understand, this was something that in my ignorance, I assumed would fail. Again, in my ignorance. So we have a lot to learn. Here's a really good, what are the odds? This is Thomas Sweatman. Hey, Tom, how are you? I asked, what are the odds that someone not experienced at all in running Colorado Rapids, which Peter is, could actually make it through? Now that's a good question, because Peter has experience rowing those giant 18-foot rafts, but he didn't tell you he has no kayaking experience. So if someone was a good swimmer, again, a couple guys in the 50s proved you didn't need a boat. You needed a good life jacket. Bill Beer and Daggett. What was Daggett's first name? John Daggett, 1954. Went through Grand Canyon with life jackets. And I would postulate that a tule raft is as close to a life jacket as you can get. You hang on to that raft, your chances of succeeding are pretty good.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. I mean, and Tom, to your question there, I like I kept saying to everybody, to my mind, it wasn't anything special. I mean, anybody with a dry suit and a propensity for at least not minding getting wet once in a while in cold Colorado River water in the middle of January could have done it. It just, you know, it didn't take much skill to kind of straddle the boat and hang on.
And Michael Remke has another, really good question. How abundant are tule reed in the Grand Canyon region along the Colorado River? Well, we answered that, but then they wrote, suddenly I wonder how many tule reed rafts are buried in ancient dwellings that are now submerged in Glen Canyon. Isn't that a thought? The tranquil waters of Glen Canyon would have been ideal for boat transport. Indeed, they would have been. And indeed, the indigenous people's occupation of Glen Canyon, well documented throughout the entire Glen. It's a really good point you make there.
Michael, just on that, just to follow up on that, I have started going through some of the Glen Canyon archaeological reports to see if I see, anything, because there's a number of dry rock shelters that they at least did a quick survey in. And of course, they found a lot of cordage, a lot of basketry, a lot of stuff like that. And but so far I've just gotten started on that, but and also looking at some of the rock art that they documented as well. But yeah, I've wondered about that.
Well, this is a great conversation. I feel like this is hopefully just the beginning of talking about indigenous raft technology. I'm fascinated by rewriting how we present history so that we put what truly came first, rather than sharing the stories of John Wesley Powell as the first experiences in these places. And I think there's a lot of potential to think about connecting you all with Tom. Surely you know Colleen Cooley and
Yeah.
folks of her nature who work a lot with tribal communities and are deeply embedded in the rafting community to, at the very least, make something fun of this type of work and continue pushing it forward. So I
Absolutely.
think with that, unless folks have any last minute questions, I'm happy to wrap this up for the evening. Tom and Peter, thanks again for spending the time to put together this presentation. It was an absolute delight of an adventure story using native plants. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you, Michael and Amanda.
Yeah,
I
thank
have
you
to
both.
agree. That was such a wonderful story, and my palms were sweating thinking about taking that raft through lava. I just can't even imagine. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful story. I love to incorporate native plants and great adventures together.
Yeah. That was more adventure than native plants. Sorry about that, but next time.
Thank you.
Your game.
Okay.
Thanks
All right.
everyone that attended. We appreciate you being
Yeah.
here.
Thank you, it's great. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.